And just so you know, we did not plan this.
No, but now you should wear red today as you're
getting
up and getting ready for the day ahead.
This is what happens.
Good to have you with us on this Friday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Let's get started this morning in Washington as we are just hours away from a potential partial government shutdown if Congress can't pass a funding bill.
Lawmakers have until midnight Eastern time to pass a funding package. President Biden has said he'll sign the bill if approved by Congress. The White House and congressional leaders reached a tentative deal earlier this week, and now the clock is ticking. Yesterday, lawmakers released the text of the $1.2 trillion funding bill. It remains unclear whether Congress has enough time to pass it before that deadline. Some House Republicans are expressing concern about what they say is not in the bill.
This bill is a complete and total failure. I got a prominent individual that follows all the border stuff just texted me and said it was, quote, an effing surrender on the border, because it is. We get nothing. Literally nothing changes on the border.
NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin joins us with the latest. So, Julie, this bill more than 1,000 pages long. How likely is it to pass before tonight's deadline? Where do things stand right now?
Okay, first of all, I'm jealous that I missed the memo. You guys look great. Listen, it's going to go down to the wire today. First, the House is going to have to vote on this bill. We're told sometime mid-morning, but you see that reaction from some House Republicans who are really frustrated with this bill. So certainly the votes are going to be troubling for Speaker Johnson. He's going to rely on a lot of Democratic votes to come through. Remember, he needs 2/3 of the House to pass this. And then the Senate expects to receive this bill sometime around midday. Now, look, they've been working all week to try and come up with some kind of time agreement. Remember, all 100 senators need to come to an agreement to pass this bill ahead of that midnight deadline. They think they'll get there in part because the 2-week Easter recess is set to begin tomorrow. There's also a funeral, for example, of one of the top appropriators' mothers. So certainly they have some jet fumes to get out of town, but it will come down to the wire, guys. It's still not clear if they'll go a little bit past the midnight deadline, but certainly no appetite for a government shutdown as they want to get this appropriations process for this year done with.
So, Julie, as you mentioned, he's going to need some Democrats here. Some House Republicans have also been critical of House Speaker Mike Johnson as he tries to pass this spending bill with this very small Republican majority. What are their concerns?
Well, they're concerned that this bill is too bloated. This really is a product that is bipartisan. Neither side got any extreme wins here or extreme losses. They all kind of moderately benefited from this piece of legislation. Those House conservatives, though, like Chip Roy, that you heard a little bit from at the top, they wanted more wins for Republicans, especially when it comes at the border. And they just think this bill, the price tag, much too high. Take a listen to some of what they had to say.
I've been reluctant to criticize him because I like him, but now what he did here was not right. At least do a CR. We had options to do a CR until April, May. Yes, it would have cut the pork out. To his credit, he met with the Freedom Caucus, but a lot of us are very frustrated.
I'm not talking about consequences. Again, Mike's a friend, but this is a mistake. This is a bad bill. We shouldn't have put it on the floor. Leadership owns it. And anybody who votes for this bill, they own all of the consequences of the mass paroles, of the people being released into the United States.
Now, with those guys like Chip Roy, Ralph Norman that you heard from, they pretty much wanted a full year stopgap government funding measure to get those 1% cuts across the board kicked in. That's something that wouldn't be good for the Departments of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, for example. And certainly those guys, they feel like leadership negotiated this in secret, which they largely did between the White House and all bipartisan leaders.
So, Julie, clearly Homeland Security is a big sticking point in these negotiations. Lawmakers unable to settle on that until this past week. Walk us through the impact a partial shutdown could have on what's happening at the southern border.
Yeah, partial shutdown would be devastating at the southern border. We've reported time and time and again over the last year how overwhelmed the resources are at the border. Democrats were really pushing for more funding, for more resources for border agents, for more detention beds, for more resources for ICE as well, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're set to have a $500 million shortfall come May. So you could see if they did agree to a partial shutdown or they agreed to a stopgap funding measure just for that agency alone, that would have really had damaging consequences down the pike. So you hear Republicans complain, well, there wasn't enough border enforcement provisions in this bill. Yeah, that might be true. They didn't get the policy that they wanted, but this is something Democrats wouldn't budge on, especially after Republicans rejected that bipartisan Senate bill just a couple of months ago. Johnson, though, touting a lot of wins at the border, too, especially for border agents in terms of pay increase, increases, and especially for technology for the border and that fence over there that prevents migrants from illegally crossing the border. So certainly neither side won here, but you're going to hear a lot of conservatives hammering what went into this product.
All right, Julie, thank you so much.
Well, the Department of Justice is suing Apple in a landmark antitrust case that accuses the tech giant of monopolizing the smartphone market.
Prosecutors say the monopoly drives up costs for customers and stops developers from releasing products on other smart devices. Following the suit, Apple pushed back, accusing the Biden administration of overreaching. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett has more.
Attorney General Merrick Garland announcing a landmark lawsuit accusing tech giant Apple of leveraging its dominance over the smartphone market to box out competitors in a way that hurts customers.
Apple has consolidated its monopoly power not by making its own products better, but by making other products worse. Consumers should not have to pay higher prices because companies break the law.
The Justice Department joining more than a dozen states in nearly a 90-page complaint accusing the company of violating antitrust laws through the iPhone, Apple Watch, and Apple Pay. DOJ saying the tech behemoth, which has more than 1 billion active iPhones worldwide, deliberately makes products less compatible with its competitors' devices.
As any iPhone user who has ever seen a green text message or received a tiny, grainy video can attest,
Garland specifically calling out Apple CEO Tim Cook, referencing this exchange Cook had back in 2022 when he was asked if the company would fix the problems associated with texting video between iPhones and Androids.
Not to make it personal, but I can't send my mom certain videos or she can't send me certain videos. And so we leave
Buy your mom an iPhone.
Apple today calling the lawsuit wrong on the facts and the law, saying it threatens who we are and the principles that set Apple products apart in fiercely competitive markets. If successful, it would hinder our ability to create the kind of technology people expect from Apple. The lawsuit, the culmination of years of regulatory scrutiny of Apple's wildly popular products, fueling its growth into one of the most valuable companies in the world.
People love buying their iPhones. People enjoy their iPhones. It is the most popular smartphone brand here in the United States.
Our thanks to Laura Jarrett for that report.
Joining us now for more on what this new lawsuit means for Apple is NBC News legal analyst Danny Zavallo. So, Danny, what is all this about?
So I'm going to try and sum up antitrust law, the most complex area of law in the United States, in one sentence. Here's how it works. In America, a capitalist system, we say if you work hard and build a tremendous business, you can achieve anything. You can move to the top of your field and dominate your industry. But if you do it too much, then you've gone too far. You've created a monopoly, and the DOJ will come in and break you up and sue you and penalize you, essentially, for rising to the very top of your field. It's a mixed message because some of the allegations here you could read in the complaint about what Apple's doing wrong, you could say are what makes Apple awesome. I mean, you think about it, and there is a kind of discrimination that goes on. Consider, for example, we've all done it. Have you been in that group text message with your friends, and you've got that one friend
text,
who's turning everybody green with the Android?
And then suddenly nobody gets the text, and it blows everything up.
Exactly right. That is modern-day discrimination that's going on every day. For me, that friend is Randy, and he's a huge pain. We need Randy to switch over. But, you know, that's a very real bias that goes to the core of this complaint by DOJ. And is it a bug or is it a feature? That's the real dilemma when it comes to antitrust law.
Green bubble versus blue.
Does Randy watch Morning News Now?
Randy is a Luddite. Randy, I don't even know if Randy has a TV. He's one of those people. I don't know what goes on with Android users.
We'll never know. Talking smack.
I feel like Randy's not his real name.
No. Oh, Randy's his real name, and I'll drop the last name, too, because I'm that angry at Randy.
Oh, my gosh, that's so funny. Okay, what is Apple saying about these allegations that they are impacting the free and fair market?
Apple's essentially saying, look, this is the result of our competitive features that we've used to rise above all the competitors. And it's a fair enough argument. The problem for Apple is that DOJ has a lot of Apple's own words by its executives, behind the scenes, probably words in messages they thought would never see the light of day. But they're essentially saying, hey, let's go after this and make Apple the only choice. And I'm paraphrasing. Please, I'm paraphrasing here. But let's make Apple the only choice. And really, again, that could cut both ways. You could look at that and say, hey, that is good old-fashioned American competitive spirit. Or you could say, hey, you're unfairly boxing out these other competitors in the field by making their products inferior because only Apple users can use your products.
You mentioned there's that line between successful and too successful. How does the law draw that line?
Oh, when it comes to antitrust, it's the grayest area because how do you even compare different industries? In fact, how do you even compare different industries in the tech sector? DOJ's gone after Google. They've gone after Meta. But even those companies are vastly different. I mean, I don't have a Facebook phone. I don't have a Google phone. I know they exist. Most of us have iPhones. So even that makes Apple a totally different entity, even though these kinds of actions are brought against tech entities. And then when they're brought against, industries that have nothing to do with tech, how do you even compare them? Antitrust is incredibly complex, and oftentimes right and wrong really exists in the eye of the beholder or the Android user, whatever that maniac's up to.
And oftentimes when something like this is brought, it's because of a merger going on, right? Like some companies trying to buy another company, and all of a sudden, just like we've been talking about with Kroger, there's going to be too many of the same type of grocery store, something like that. When, as a consumer, if it's just like, we all just like the iPhone, like they did a good job, and it's not because they're trying to buy somebody, it's just because their product is good. Does that weigh anything? Does that make it harder for them to actually go after Apple?
Absolutely. You've essentially made Apple's argument that these are not us. These are not the product of us crowbarring others or boxing others out of the industry unfairly. We've done it fairly by creating a superior product. Of course, the DOJ is going to argue that no, by making some of your features only available to Apple users, you're perpetuating this problem, and it's not fair. See, antitrust is really ultimately about a concept of fairness in a very unfair world, which is capitalism, which is hardly a place where everybody comes to play nice. They play to win in this field.
All right. Danny Savalos helping us break it all down.
Yeah,
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, this morning, the United Nations Security Council is set to vote on a U.S.-backed resolution that calls for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war.
According to a draft seen by NBC News, the resolution also calls for the immediate release of all hostages remaining in Gaza. Comes as Secretary of State Antony Blinken visits Israel today to meet with top officials there. Tensions between the longtime allies continue to grow over Israel's plan to invade Rafah. Throughout Gaza, the ongoing humanitarian crisis does continue. At Al-Shifa Hospital, an IDF spokesperson says Hamas militants have barricaded themselves inside rooms and that Israeli forces are relocating patients as they conduct combat operations. The Gaza media office says 13 patients died this week because patients have no access to medicine and food. NBC News has not independently verified those claims by the IDF or Gaza media office.
NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez is in Tel Aviv with the latest, and Hagar Shamali is also joining us. She is the host of Oh My World on YouTube and a former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the UN and former NSC director for Syria and Lebanon. Good morning to both of you. Raf, I'll start with you there. What else do we know about this U.S.-sponsored resolution that the UN is set to vote on today?
Savannah, good morning. So the U.S. bringing this resolution up at the UN Security Council in New York, 9 a.m. today. The U.S. says it has been working with the 15 members of the Security Council trying to smooth the path for this resolution as it goes to a final vote. But you've heard Secretary Blinken here in the region over the last couple of days making the case that this American formula, an immediate ceasefire tied to the release of the hostages, is the best way to pause the fighting and to get humanitarian relief into Gaza. Take a listen.
There's a clear consensus around a number of shared priorities. First, the need for an immediate, sustained ceasefire with the release of hostages. That would create space to surge more humanitarian assistance to relieve the suffering of many people. Children should not be dying of malnutrition in Gaza or anywhere else for that matter.
Now, guys, quick reminder of the complicated politics at the UN Security Council. The U.S. needs the votes of 9 out of the 15 members to pass this resolution, but it also needs to make sure that none of the other permanent members veto it. So that's the U.K. and France, both close U.S. allies. They're not going to veto it, but then all eyes on Russia and China, who could, if they decide to, block this resolution. Guys.
So, Hagar, this draft comes after the U.S. did use its veto to reject 3 prior ceasefire resolutions that came before the Security Council. Is this a sign now that President Biden's taking a harder line with Israel moving forward?
Well, actually, the resolution itself pretty much repeats something that the U.S. has been saying all along, which is if Hamas releases all the hostages, then there would be no need for a war. And so what this resolution does is actually include two elements that were missing in the past resolutions. One of them is a demand that all hostages be released in exchange for, as the U.S. calls it, an immediate and sustained ceasefire, but they mean permanent. And number two, that it recognizes October 7 and Israel's right to defend itself. So what they're trying to say is they're trying to tie it all together. Instead of just calling for a permanent ceasefire with nothing else in exchange, they're trying to remind the world this is why the war started. It was because of October 7. Israel has a right to defend itself, as any country would if faced with a similar terrorist attack. This is something Hamas brought onto itself, and we want it to end. We feel urgent about it because of this incoming famine, but Hamas needs to give up all the hostages in order to do that. So they're trying to lay blame squarely on Hamas.
Raf, let's bring you back here. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting Israel today after holding meetings in Egypt yesterday. What are we watching for with this visit?
So he's already met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and then he met with the extended war cabinet. We're expecting to hear from the secretary a little bit later before he flies back to the U.S., hear a little bit about what was said in those meetings. But we know that towards the top of the agenda is this deep disagreement between the U.S. and Israel over Israeli plans to attack the city of Rafah in southern Gaza, where more than 1 million Palestinian civilians are sheltering. The U.S. has made very clear now that it opposes any large-scale military operation in Rafah. But we've heard from the Israelis that they believe it is the only way to destroy Hamas, to go into Rafah on the ground with ground forces. So today's meetings you could think of as the first in what's going to be a series of encounters between the U.S. and Israeli governments on this topic. Several of the senior Israeli officials who were in the room at this war cabinet meeting are heading to Washington early next week to hear out American concerns about Rafah, to hear about possible alternatives to a full-scale attack. And then we are also going to have the Israeli defense minister at the Pentagon later in the week. So this really the first of what's going to be several high-stakes meetings on this.
And Hagar, looking ahead, Secretary Blinken is pushing to try and finalize an Arab-backed resolution that would lay out the vision for a post-conflict Gaza. That plan would eventually lead to a Palestinian state. Blinken says they're close to having a plan that they could present to Israel, but we know the Israeli government does not appear ready to accept Palestinian statehood. So what does that mean for this plan?
Sure. The Israeli government, certainly Netanyahu himself and Benny Gantz as well, are not in favor of a two-state solution. And by the way, the vast majority of both Israelis and Palestinians do not support a two-state solution. And the reason for that is that neither believes that the other will recognize the other's right to exist. And that's because of years of failed peace plans and spoilers like Hamas. And so that doesn't mean that a two-state solution can't be implemented. You have a number of leaders at the very top in Israel and the Palestinians who are of an older guard, who believe that missed opportunities for a two-state solution that they regret it, and that they wouldn't have been in the situation they are in now if they had had a two-state solution. And they understand that that is the only solution going forward. And I agree personally. I mean, that is an opinion. I agree with the U.S. government on that a two-state solution is the only way. So their goal is if they can get enough broad Arab support and they can get support at the Security Council by everybody to ask for the hostages back, that they can implement this two-state solution.
Hagar Shamali and Raf Sanchez, thank you both very much.
Former President Donald Trump is facing a tight deadline to post bond for his $464 million civil fraud judgment.
He has until Monday to try to secure the money for the full amount of the fraud case judgment. After that, New York Attorney General Letitia James can begin seizing his assets and property while Trump appeals the verdict. The only problem is he says he doesn't have it. His lawyers say he has no way of securing that much money, and they're calling it a practical impossibility.
NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen joins us now. So, John, what happens if Trump can't secure a bond for that $464 million judgment?
Hey, good morning, guys. This is like the end of a Monopoly game, where you're mortgaging off the last remaining properties or selling them to your cousin Tim. In exchange for a get-out-of-jail-free card. I mean, we're looking at Trump trying to figure out how he can make this judgment. Look, if he's not able to come up with the money There are a couple things that could happen. Number one, Letitia James could seize his properties, not all of them, but enough to satisfy that judgment. Or Donald Trump could declare bankruptcy, which we've seen him do before in the past. There's some possibility that an appeals court will come in and stay this ruling for some extra time to give him an opportunity to go through the appeal without having to cough up properties.
So if New York Attorney General Letitia James does start to seize Trump's property, if it gets to that point, what does that process even look like?
Good God, Savannah. I think it looks like, first of all, a very politically messy one, right? We've already seen Donald Trump basically on social media complaining about this possibility, about his business being destroyed, about him being unfairly targeted. What does that process look like with anybody else? I think it would be a pretty sort of standard process of just kind of taking control of these things. But who knows? I hesitate to make a prediction simply because we just don't know.
Good God. There you go.
Yeah, I know.
So John, it seems like Trump has two bad options. If he can't come up with the money, have his property seized or declare bankruptcy. We know that every part of this legal process has helped him politically. From a political standpoint, how would this affect him?
I think in either case, you're really going to hear kind of the same thing, which is what we've been hearing all along, that he will make the argument that he's being unfairly targeted by Democrats, and that he's, been effectively brought to his knees on a business level by this judgment, and whether that's because he has to cough up $500 million or have assets seized, either one of those outcomes is something that he can play to his base. Now, certainly that doesn't work well with Democratic voters, and I think for many independents, they may believe that Trump has been targeted in some way, but they also may believe that he has done some things wrong.
Hey, John, also, Trump has been able to use donor money to pay for some of his lawyers' fees in the past. Is it possible that money raised through donors could be used here to pay this civil judgment?
Yeah, the campaign finance system is basically like legal money laundering, but even this would be a big test of that. I think that there's basically the Federal Election Commission, which oversees campaign finance, is not as effective as it once was in monitoring it, but still, this would be a huge leap beyond what anything we've ever seen in campaign finance before, and it could create greater legal trouble for Trump. So I think the short answer to your question is no. He won't be using campaign funds for this.
All right, John, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Well, new details are emerging about that prison break in Idaho. This morning, police are confirming that a third person has been arrested and charged in connection with the escape. That is in addition to the escaped inmate Skylar Mead, who's now back behind bars, and his alleged accomplice, Nicholas Umfenor, who's also under arrest. The men are accused of planning what authorities are calling a coordinated attack that left 3 officers wounded when they allegedly tried to free Mead as he was being transported from a hospital in Boise. NBC News correspondent Dana Griffin joins us now from Twin Falls, Idaho, with more on this. Dana, good morning. So, Dana, what are police saying at this point about the latest arrest?
Yes, Savannah, good morning to you. They say it is a woman who is now behind bars along with these 2 suspects. They say she was driving the car when they were involved in that pursuit. They have charged her with a felony, eluding, and also possession of a controlled substance. It's unclear what her relationship is to Mead or Umfenor, but right now investigators say she is going to be held accountable for taking part in this sort of escape because she helped them while they were on the run. Savannah, Joe?
So, Dana, the escaped inmate and his suspected accomplice were taken back in custody yesterday. That was after that 36-hour manhunt. Walk us through some of those details there. What was that manhunt like? How were they caught?
Yeah, so they had been combing the state because they said the day that they escaped, they could be anywhere. They were in a Honda Civic. They later ditched that vehicle and got into another one. Investigators say they were found in southern Idaho, but also that they may have traveled to other parts of the state. So around 2 p.m. Thursday, investigators say they found these men. There was a short pursuit, but that it ended with no further gunfire. So they were really happy that no one else was hurt. Savannah, Joe.
Dana, police are now looking into 2 separate homicides, right, that they think may be linked to the prison break. Why do authorities think they are connected, and what are they doing to determine that?
Yeah, so they're really tight-lipped on the connection between these 2 men that were found dead and the 2 suspects. But they said that there was a key piece of evidence left behind by the suspects. Listen to what investigators told us.
Our folks are still on the scenes of those homicides. It has not been that long since we found this out, so we're still investigating. We did find the shackles at the scene of one of the homicides, so that's one of the ways that we tied them together.
So they were arrested here in southern Idaho, but these murders happened in northern Idaho. So that's why investigators say they went across the state. So they're obviously going to be looking at, were these men that they were looking to settle some kind of score, or if it was some random people that happened to get in their way as they were trying to live a life on the run. Savannah?
And Dana, in that same vein, I mean, do we know the relationship between the 2? How do Meade and Umfenauer know one another?
Yeah, so they are members of the same white supremacist gang, the Aryan Knights, and investigators say they were once housed together in the same maximum security prison, and this happened between 2020 and 2024. But right now, those 2 men are once again back together as jailmate friends inside this county jail behind me, and we're told they are expected to be arraigned sometime today for charges stemming to that brazen escape. Savannah.
Wow, Dana Griffin, what an update. Thank you so much. Well, now let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather forecast on this morning. We have Michelle Grossman in studio with us. Michelle, good morning.
Morning, Savannah. Great to see you. And we have a busy weekend. We have a busy day today, busy weekend, because we have a weekend triple threat. We have 2 storms that are going to be impacting many of us with rain, heavy rain, and also the chance for some snow. So here's your weekend triple threat. There's radar. As we zoom in a little closer, I'll kind of pinpoint where we're going to see the storms. Today, we're seeing the storms in the Midwest. That is snow falling, some really heavy snow falling in portions of the upper Midwest right now. This heavy snow is going to move into New England, and we could see a foot of snow in New England by tomorrow. Then we have the warmer side of the storm. This is a second area of low pressure that's going to bring some really heavy rain. We're already seeing it right now. Could see the chance of some flooding rains and even the chance of severe weather as well. Then that storm number 3, that's going to come on Sunday, and that's going to move across country. So it's going to be a major spring storm with lots of snow in many places and then some additional rain. We have many alerts this morning on this Friday morning. 32 million people under winter alerts in this early part of spring, from Montana all the way to Maine. We also have some flood watches as well. That includes portions of the mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, into New England, also parts of southern Florida. We could see some flooding rains there, but 50 million under flood watches. And we're going to see the chance for some very heavy rain. It's going to be a wet start to the weekend for many. This is what radar looks like right now. You can see it's already active. Those darker colors showing us where that heavy rain is falling along the Gulf Coast into portions of the Southeast, especially into parts of southern Florida. Again, we could see some gusty storms as well. Then on the cold side, we're looking at that snow falling. Notice you see that pink. We haven't seen that in quite some time. That is a mixture of some rain and snow, some ice, some sleet in some spots as we go throughout the next day or 2. So here's the setup here. We're going to see heavy rain, flooding risk for portions of Florida, the Southeast, moderate snowfall from the Midwest to the Great Lakes, then really heavy snowfall as we get towards tomorrow in portions of New England. This is going to be a mess here. If you're going out and about, you're off to spring break next week and your flight takes off tomorrow, you definitely want to call ahead towards the airports because we're looking at some really heavy rain falling. We're looking at an icy mix here. We're also looking at snow. Again, could see a foot of snow in many, many spots. So as we go throughout the forecast here, this is through Saturday, locally 18 inches of snow in some spots. That's where you're seeing the pink and purple. That's corresponding to the higher amounts of snow. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be wet, and then a whole lot of rain from the Gulf Coast into the Southeast. Those darker colors once again telling us where we're expecting the highest amounts of rain, 6 to 7 inches of rain. That's certainly going to cause some problems and some flooding, and it's not going to let up as it moves up the eastern seaboard tomorrow because we're looking at likely amounts of 4 inches in some spots. You're going to stay indoors tomorrow, grab the umbrella. Some spots you're going to need the snow shovel. But talking about that severe weather threat, this is along the Gulf Coast and then into portions of southern Florida. We could see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour with any strong storms. Could see a tornado or two possible, and certainly the chance of some hail. That continues into the early part of Saturday morning. We're now talking about the Carolinas. Cape Hatteras could see some stronger storms. And then we're still under the gun for some strong storms still in southern Florida tomorrow. And same scenario. We're going to see the winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour and also some really heavy rain. And then also talking about the chance of that heavy snow Sunday into Tuesday. That's the second storm where we could see 18 inches of snow in some spots.
Ooh,
Anna?
18 inches. Winter
Crazy.
is not over quite yet, even if the calendar says so. Yep. Michelle, thank you. We'll see you in a little bit. Sure.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.